So, so, so I'm excusing myself, but before that, I welcome you all on behalf of Antarrashtriya Sahyog Parishad, the premier organization working with the diaspora. And we have started from the east, where the sun rises. And New Zealand being the first, I'm glad that we are working on dialogue with diaspora in New Zealand. So you're all welcome, and please express, though I'm missing, I'll follow up on the proceedings and understand what has happened. So I appreciate that you joined, and namaste all.
Thank you, Shyamji. Thank you so much for helping us launch this initiative. So we come back to the business of the day.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I will be requesting both of you, Venkatji and Prabha, to help us understand the profile, nature, as I say, lovely stories, memories, challenges, future vision of a diaspora in New Zealand. I was, in fact, working on a project along with Gopalji with a college in Delhi University precisely on Indian diaspora in New Zealand. And those youngsters, a team of about 6 students, they prepared a draft of a research paper on Indian diaspora in New Zealand, which I got a chance to review last week. So my memories are absolutely fresh and detailed. So I would use those details as part of our conversation. Believe me, having dealt with the international affairs now for almost my active service and post superannuation almost close to 40 years, believe me, I was myself pleasantly surprised when I read about Indian diaspora in New Zealand. I couldn't imagine that Indian diaspora would constitute almost 5% of the country's population and would be leaders in terms of most of the cutting edge aspects of any society, which means higher education, employability, technology awareness, and above all, of course, which we are very proud, how the local communities look at Indian diaspora as a very positive factor in their own development. When I looked at this figure, this Indian diaspora contributes $10 billion to the New Zealand GDP. I think I couldn't be more proud of a diaspora contribution anywhere in the world. So please, I can go on and talk about New Zealand based on my reading on New Zealand. I've never been to New Zealand. I've been to that region. Never to New Zealand. I passed by New Zealand through Australia, Fiji, and other places. But unfortunately, I was never there in New Zealand. So please, my first request will be, please take a few minutes, both of you, and tell us, how do you look at the diaspora? How it started, far off place, very far, in fact. If you ask Indians, a majority of Indians would not even know on the map how to locate New Zealand, and how they reached there and became so successful. So should I start with Prabha, ladies first, as we always call? So Prabha, you take 2 minutes, give your views, and then we'll switch to Venkat.
Sure. Namaste, Anupji, and thank you for this opportunity to have this informal discussion, which is fantastic. And I'm so proud and privileged that we are part of the first lot of this dialogue. And starting from East, as Mr. Shyamji mentioned, it's really wonderful that we are starting from East to West. So getting the ball rolling, as we say. So we've started to get the ball rolling, which is awesome. Thank you so much. And it's my pleasure to be with Venkatji, who I've known for the last 22 years in New Zealand since I migrated. So it's been a It's an honor actually being alongside him and talking about our experience. So, just to share some of my experiences when we first moved to New Zealand, this is 23 years ago. I would say that the Indian population in New Zealand was not as you have just described, not anywhere close to even 5%, but there was a huge number of Indians, but mainly from one particular state, which is Gujarat. So we had a lot of migrants from Gujarat who migrated 50, 60 years, even 100 years ago, many years ago to New Zealand and made New Zealand home. So we now have actually third or fourth generation Gujaratis who are living in New Zealand. So I would say they are our, the Indian ambassadors, first Indian ambassadors in New Zealand who started this journey. Following, I think in the last 25 years to 30 years, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, Venkatji, but I would say 25, 30 years, there's been a lot of migration, specifically from the IT sector. So there's huge number of people who came here to obviously for employment, but also for better lifestyle. So when we came, I would say IT sector was the most prominent sector in New Zealand for the Indian employment space. So we would be, I think most of the people who had come in, either the husband or the wife, were mainly working in the IT sector. However, there were people like Venkatji and me who came from a totally different background. We didn't come from an IT background, but we were mainly from a non-traditional Indian background, I would say, for the New Zealanders. If I put it that way, for the Kiwis, we were from a non-traditional Indian background. And I remember fielding a lot of questions initially in my first few years that, oh, you can actually speak good English. Wow, where did you learn your English from? So these were the kind of questions we were asked, which was quite insulting actually, but also we thought this is our time. For me personally, I took it as a personal mission to show that Indians have got a lot to offer to New Zealand, and that's how I started my journey, not just as a professional in strategy and planning and business development, working full time, but also started my dance school to show the art and culture space of India, because I wanted people to know India beyond cricket and Bollywood and curries. So this was my mission. I really wanted to show that there is so much more to India, so much diversity, so much for Indians to offer. And my part was to see, okay, how am I going to take small steps in revealing that to the wider New Zealand. So over time, I would say I was in the education industry for a long time, almost 17 years in international education. So I used to come to India often to recruit international students, Indian students, to study in New Zealand. So I think out of your 5% population, I would have contributed not 8% or 5% to that migration over the years. So many thousand Indian students have come through this drive, through the international education drive. And I would say in the last 10 years, if I'm going to go time frame wise, in the last 10 to 12 years, we've had huge migration from all across India, not just one state or one part or one region of India, but actually it would be balanced, I would say, except we don't have too many from northeast of India, but I would say all other states have got decent representation of people in New Zealand, contributing and celebrating their festivals, cultures. Like, for example, the Malayali Association celebrates Onam, Marathi Association, Gudi Padwa, all of those sorts of different festivals of India, which is very prominent in different states, are now celebrated by many, many, many thousands. And also Diwali has taken the flagship, and across New Zealand, it was a huge drive by Asia New Zealand Foundation, which is a government agency to promote Asia in New Zealand. This was established about two decades ago. And Asia New Zealand has done a lot of job in actually introducing some of the Indian festivals, some of the Asian festivals. And Diwali was one such festival that they picked. And they used to organize a whole range of activities across the country. And slowly over time, now Diwali is celebrated in every nook and corner of New Zealand, I would say. Around this time, we are all so busy for 3 months, end of the year, 3 months. We are only going, and my school is constantly performing for Diwali festivals, either in corporate offices or in government departments or in festivals or in community events. So that's how we have now grown to have that visibility and awareness and also the respect that Indians deserved from long time ago. But now I would say there's a lot of that awareness and acknowledgement of the Indian diaspora's contribution. So I will stop with that, so that I've given you that introduction from my perspective. I'm sure Venkatji will have more to add and a lot more wisdom.
Thank you, Prabha. Thank you for this beautiful account. That is what we were looking for. A more informal, coming from the heart, right? Because when you deal with mind, you have to be careful. Yep. So I'm very happy that you dug into those memories and shared with us. Venkatji, how would you want to add to what Prabha has narrated?
With 2 words, extremely difficult.
Yes,
But
that is why we called you.
now, just a few connotations of numbers that you mentioned, Anupji, before I go on to the actual narrative aspect. The total number of Indians or Indian population in New Zealand is around 250,000.
Mhm.
I always say that it is around 215,000 plus GST.
Good one.
Now, this comprises 3 major segments. 30% or 32% of this 250,000 will be people from India or of Indian birth, coming from various parts of the world or from India. Another 30 or 32% will be Indians from Fiji, and the remaining 32% or so will be from people from the rest of the world, like Indian Ocean countries, South Africa, North Africa, East Africa. As you would know, Anupji, historically, from 1972 onwards, after Idi Amin's dictum, a lot of Indians started moving out of African countries, and they chose, among others, New Zealand as a place of domicile. So that is one of the reasons why you have a lot of Gujaratis who came in here prior to independence of India and also post-independence era. Now, the second aspect you mentioned about $10 billion to the GDP, those 10 billion, of course, is New Zealand dollars.
Yeah, yes.
And we are not really aware of what exactly they are, whether it is to the GDP. Anyway, we do accept the fact with grace that Indians are great contributors to the economic progress of New Zealand. Thirdly, the Asia Foundation, New Zealand Foundation that Prabha mentioned about, was established in 2000, the year 2000. It was called at that time Asia 2000 Foundation. It was a vision of Helen Clark, who was at that time the Prime Minister. Her primary aim was to get close to India, and therefore she established it under the chairmanship of Anand Satyanand, who was at that time an ombudsman. He became the Governor General in 2006. And in 2002, I had the honor and privilege of initiating the Diwali festival for Asia 2000 Foundation. They wanted to have it in Auckland. Therefore, I took them to the Auckland Indian Association, which incidentally is marking its 100th year now. It completed 100 years last year. And it's the first Indian association which has completed a century. And it's the first um, ethnic community organization to have completed a century, absolutely scandal free. That's the most important aspect of an association like this. Now, having said that, India's connection or engagement with New Zealand can be perceived from two viewpoints. One is pre-Treaty of Waitangi, which occurred in 1840, and the other post-Treaty of Waitangi. Now, according to records, and a book that has been just published but not yet sent to for sale in public because of the lockdown, the book is called Invisible. It was commissioned by the New Zealand Indian Central Association by a historian. According to her, the first Indians who came to New Zealand occurred in 1769. That is even before the French Revolution. They came as soldiers in a ship, or lascars as they were called. Mm. And there's a film that's coming out. It's called The Lascars of India. Mm. These were the first two, and they were both Muslims. And they were here briefly in New Zealand. And there are also historic records to show that a Tamil kingdom was involved with New Zealand. There is a temple bell, which is on display at Te Papa Museum, the National Museum of New Zealand in Wellington, which shows that the bell was perhaps, we don't have historic records, gifted to the Maori by a king during his visits to this part of the world. As we know, Anupji, the Indian kingdoms extended as far as Sumatra, which is Indonesia. And from there, they were seafarers and they came to New Zealand. So the history of Indo-New Zealand relationship goes back. And after the Treaty of Waitangi was signed in 1840, unpublished or not properly recorded facts show that there was an Indian family, two people came from India to take part in gold digging in the southern part of New Zealand, in Otago, in Dunedin. They were mentioned as some of the earliest people who came. But according to the latest the records that are available, Punjabis came to New Zealand in 1890. That has been recorded. And they celebrated the 100th anniversary of their arrival in New Zealand in 1990. They published a book. But later on, all these dates have been challenged to say that the engagement between India and New Zealand date far back, and it will take a considerable amount of historic research to establish. Now, in terms of modern New Zealand, we can again divide the diaspora's participation and the Indo-Kiwi relationship from 3 or 4 angles. At the bottom of this is the political angle, which there are aspirations for closer engagement, but it has not occurred as we thought we would. The second is educational, because education is a pathway for many Indians to come to New Zealand and also become citizens and carry on from there. A brilliant example of that is Priyanka Radhakrishnan, the first person of Indian origin to become a minister in New Zealand. She came to New Zealand as an international student and then came into politics, got elected. She's the second Indian to be elected in New Zealand Parliament. And the third aspect is the cultural and social aspect, which can be meaningfully engaged between these two countries. Now, Prabha mentioned about Diwali. Anupji, Diwali is celebrated everywhere. It was in 2003, the year that India established the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. That year, New Zealand celebrated in Parliament Diwali. And that initiative was taken by a Muslim MP of Pakistani origin. He initiated the Diwali festival to be held in Parliament, which is held now every year. Apart from Diwali, the events that are held in Parliament are Pongal, Eid, then Baisakhi, and they're planning a couple of others for the Africans and so on. I would be very happy to discuss each of these aspects with you, but 1 hour is not enough, but it's a good beginning. Thanks for the opportunity, Anupji.
Thank you so much, Venkatji. Gopalji, you would want to take on in case there is any supplementary to this, and then I'll get back.
Thank you, Ambassador Mudgal. In fact, Prabhaji and Venkatramanji have, very elaborately, taken us through the journey of migration of Indians, starting from Mahmud Qasim, in the 18th century, and Nasreen, who came from Puducherry and Bengal. And, right from the Lascars of India to the migrant laborers, during that, what we call indentureship period. So some of them migrated to New Zealand also. But more importantly, subsequently, the profile of diaspora, the way it changed, coming to the businessman, the Gujarati businessman, and of late the professionals that Prabhaji and Venkatramanji mentioned, and the way they are contributing in the economy and in important segments of the New Zealand society. I would like to ask both of them that how do the native population, take this, changing profile of the Indians? So if they can just let us know, as the graph of the Indian diaspora is improving, what is the response of the native population there?
Now we can start with Venkat. In fact, let's reverse the order.
Okay, thank you. Gopalji, a correction in case I have not heard you properly. Indians did not come to New Zealand as indentured laborers. They went, the closest to New Zealand was Fiji. They went in 1879 because by that time slavery had been abolished and the British could not take Indians by any other means except to say that they're going as under an agreement, and the rest is history. As far as the local population is concerned, there is a certain element of reservation and nervousness that is becoming more and more apparent among the Maori population, because the Maoris today constitute less than 16% of New Zealand's population. The resident population of New Zealand is about 5 million. And I used to say that the growth of population in New Zealand is almost 1 million every 30 years. If we go back over the last 70 to 80 years and see the growth in population, 1 million is added once in 30 years. But of course, the current block of 30 years, the million could be less than 30 years, but it still would take not less than 20 years for New Zealand to get another million. The Maori population, they are bound, or most of the land or all of the land is owned by Maori, and then it is leased out under the Lease Act, which is leased out for 999 years and so on. For the last few years, there was a growing feeling among Maori that they are being neglected, because unfortunately, the Maori are represented in some negative statistics in this country. A, in crime, B, in health, 3, in education, and so on, and also in income. So the governments, successive governments over the last 30 to 35 years have been trying to do their best to improve the lot of the Maori. When it comes to the Indian diaspora, fortunately and happily, there is a closer cooperation between the two communities. Maori and Indian communities, they engage themselves very well. In fact, the Hindus in New Zealand have been working very closely with Maori in various parts of the country. When we say Maori Gopalji, it's very similar to the tribal folk we have in India. Each of the tribes is different. They have different needs. They speak different, their approaches are different. Here, although Maori speak the same language, their approach to the Treaty of Waitangi and their approach to politics is different. There are so many EVs all over the tribes, all over the country. So the Indian diaspora is constructively engaging with them. Prabha, would you like to add?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with Venkatji that Indian diaspora is exploring every possible way to engage with the Maori community. One of the ways is through art. The other is through mainly art and culture is the biggest space, and language. A lot of language learning is also happening. There's a lot of awareness on learning Tirio. So that's important for us, even, for people, Indians who are working in the government sector. Everything we start with the karakia, which is a prayer in Maori language. So it is becoming more and more necessary now that the government is actively wanting to bring that status back to the Maoris, that all the meetings are starting with the karakia. So language learning is becoming an important part for people who are working mainly in the government sector, but also they have realized that if they want to engage effectively with the Maori community, we need to know their culture and language. The other thing that I would say, the synergy is the cultural aspect of it, very similar. They are also very family oriented. They have joint families. They live in their own community groups, like how we do, Indians. So for us, family is so important, and the extended whānau, they call it as whānau family. Extended family is even more important for us, our uncles and aunts and, the diaspora. Similarly, if you look at those synergies, so there's so many commonalities between the Indian culture and the Maori culture. And so that's another way of when we try to engage with them, we are starting with those sorts of connections first, because it's not easy to connect with them straight away, because they still have that reservation of, okay, are you taking our space? So we don't want to, without any sort of intrusion, we want to do it in a way that we are more collaborative, we are more looking at that partnership and actually understanding the mutual relationship and the commonalities and the differences as well. We do have our own differences, but in a way that is very respectful, meaningful, and engaging, and seeing how can we take this forward to showcase. And that was as you saw in the previous presentation, I showed you a Maori and Bharatanatyam dance, where that was my way of trying to see how can we engage with our Maori community, the indigenous community in New Zealand. And like myself, there are so many others who are engaging in different fields, in research, in language learning, in so many other ways. We are also engaging. So I would say that, as Venkatji mentioned, we are very fortunate to be in that space, to be able to engage with them in a positive manner. And we are welcomed.
Thank you so much, Prabha. In fact, Venkatji, I can see what is that you are trying to convey when you say this relationship probably would have been much older than documented. When you mentioned about that bell, possibly from Tamil origin in the temple. Venkatji, we know for sure that Indian connection with the east of India is ancient, in fact. Right from the days of Kalinga's pre-Christ period, when the Kalingas will go, we have records and the folklore both, which says that they used to go up to Bali. But I'm sure, when you go up to Bali, you don't stop there. You further go, right? even as explorer, as friends, as traders. So I'm not surprised if you have some ancient link between this land and those islands in that region in the Pacific. Then, of course, we also know the story of Rajendra Chola, in fact, from south of India. Again, in fact, I have traveled in those countries, and how I see a continuous footprint of Indian culture, and also possibly still in the ancient period, then probably heading into the medieval period. Then, of course, during the colonial period, we had kind of close linkages in terms of the systems we were developing during that period. In fact, when I was looking at the strategic document which the New Zealand government prepared for their relationship with India by 2025, in fact, it lists what are those factors which connect India. What is that we share? And the list is very long. But, as Prabha, you mentioned, and so Venkatji, and I'm sure Gopalji's question was aimed at that. Success sometimes comes with a cost. The cost of making others feel a sense of competition. Now, tell me, Prabha, since you deal with soft power exercise, tell me what exactly the local populations admire in Indians, and what is that they fear in Indians? Are there any fault lines? What are the bridges? We know the bridge is much better than the fault lines.
Yeah, sure. I would say the positive thing is the Maoris do connect the family aspect, the cultural aspect of it. They see a lot of commonality. From my engagements with several Maori groups through my dance and through my other work, I have been asked a lot of questions about the whānau, the family, and how things happen in India. And they say this is exactly the same what we do here in New Zealand too. Our Maori population also does. So I would say that's the core link. The cultural values and the way we give importance to family is the bridge. That would be the bridge that would connect. I wouldn't say the fault line, but I would say the lesser bridge, or the not the most functional bridge, would be the fear, because we are a very fast growing population in New Zealand, and many of our Indians are doing extremely well in the careers that we have chosen, be it business, or it could be a profession, it could be law, accounting, any profession, art, soft power. In all aspects, Indians, we have really proven ourselves, including politics, now that Honorable Priyanka Radhakrishnan is a minister. In every aspect of our any field, we are excelling, or we are showing that we have so much to offer. And that, as Venkatji mentioned, unfortunately, because the Maori population have got a lot of other issues that they are dealing with, like they've been stereotyped as in the health sector, in the education sector, in the economic sector, and all of those areas that they need to be brought up to speed. When Indians are doing really, really well, and we are in the forefront of professions and in many other fields, it is seen as I won't say they're threatened, but they are worried that will their space go away. And it's not just with Indians, but I would say with any migrant who's coming into the country, that fear or that reluctance or that sort of reservation is still, I can still feel that. Even to do that fusion dance, I had to work 8 months with a Maori community to convince them that we are not taking away their tradition or speciality and showcasing as Indian, but it is a collaboration, and both the art forms will be respected equally. will be showcased in a most respectful manner. It took me 8 months to convince them. And in that 8 month period, I had to talk to at least three different Maori groups because some of them didn't engage with us, some of them didn't think that it was going to be genuine and the genuine collaboration. So this is just a small example. I'm sure there's many that people would be experiencing, but this is a small example where they feel that will our identity be lost in that growing New Zealand migrant population? How do we deal with that? And what are the challenges? And as a community, how do we keep our space intact? Is something that they have been working on a lot. So I would say there is a bridge, and there is also a lot of work to do in that space for us to improve that relationship and genuinely show them that we care about them and we want to engage with them in a positive manner. So that's my thinking.
Absolutely, Prabha. You just put the finger on the nerve, as you call it. Venkatji, would you want to add something to this? I'm sure your experience goes much deeper in terms of your association with people, in fact, on both sides, because you come from a profession where critical thinking takes precedence over everything else. How do you feel about this?
The first factor that must be taken into account as far as Maori is concerned, Maori are concerned in New Zealand, is that the greatest fear that they face is their own extinction. If we see, for instance, the Aboriginals in Australia, the Red Indians in America, and in many other natives in many parts of the world, even in India, if we take some of the tribals we used to see in the west coast of India, especially in borderlines of Karnataka, the Lambanis and many others, they are now slowly becoming extinct because they are merging themselves with the urban societies. And they are intermingling with other races and getting married. Same thing is happening with the Maori population in New Zealand. We see more and more of inter-Maori, inter-European, European Maori, Polynesian Maori, Indian Maori, and there is a mix of various other ethnic groups that are now going, the Chinese getting married to Maori. So the fear that the Maori have is that in the next 25 to 30 years, a race called Maori may not exist because of, even now, there are many, many mixed races. A person who calls himself or herself a Maori, it's very common for them to say, I'm 25% Scot, I'm 30% Irish, I'm 5% British. This kind of a mixture is very widely mentioned. So it's very hard to find who is a true Maori today. This is one of the challenges that the Maori themselves are facing. The other problem that the Maori have been facing is the fear of marginalization, which has been occurring in many countries where the local, the governing population is not the local ones. Like as we know, the European population is still the largest in New Zealand, which is around 62 to 62%. Although it might fall, it is not likely to lose its majority at any given point of time, not in the next at least a century or so. But the Maori are now more forthcoming than they used to be. They would like to understand what various other cultures are. They would like to understand what the aspirations of people are, and they try to see how best they can work with people. I can give the same example as Prabha gave about the Maori dance, that fusion that she so eloquently her children performed. My daughter is also a Bharatanatyam, Kuchipudi, and Kathak professional. And she wanted to do a program which is a merging of Maori and South Indian culture. Like she likened the haka, which the Maori perform, to the Kali dance. You know, goddess Kali with her tongue coming out as a threat or as a challenge, if you like to say. So she likened the Maori haka to the Kali dance, and then she went and met 3 different groups in and around Auckland. And it took her about 6 to 7 months to find out, take the script of the Maori songs and merge it with our Sanskrit or Tamil ones. And I must say that they were very, very fascinated that there is such a mutual commonality of religious and social sentiments that are embedded in Maori as well as in the Indian context. So we find that we as Indians are able to create inroads into the Maoridom and get to understand them much better than many other cultures. So Indians are now today learning Maori language because Maori language packages are available. You can learn Maori within a given period of time. So we find a lot of people taking those kind of initiatives. So we see that they will be subject, of course, to the threat that Maori themselves face extinction. The Indian culture and Indian influence will continue to grow.
Thank you so much, Venkatji. Gopalji, any question on this? And
Yeah,
of course, your question.
I thank both the panelists. You have really apprised us about one aspect of the sentiments of the native population there. I would like to follow it up with another aspect of the diasporic issue. You see, the Indian diaspora is known for its cultural quotient also, like it mixes up with it gels with the other communities. Now, what about the other segments of the migrants, from other communities like non-Indians, other communities from Asia or from Europe? So how do they view the Indian diaspora, and how does the Indian diaspora, mix up and gels with them? If you can just apprise us with that. Thank you.
Prabha, you can start.
Venkatji? Oh,
yeah,
me.
you
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I thought
We are
you were.
alternating. We are alternating the leads.
Okay, I would bring a perspective of, as far as New Zealand is concerned, we are all migrants. So we are Chinese or Indians or Filipinos or Indonesians, or we are ethnic communities. That's how they have bannered us. We fall under that banner of we are ethnic communities. Obviously, the 2 biggest ethnic communities is Chinese and Indians. So we are the major dominant. May I say that we are the dominant ethnic communities in New Zealand. So for us, when we are working with the mainstream, we come together as ethnic communities and we represent the ethnic communities. But within the ethnic communities, we do have a lot of differences and we do have our own celebrations. We all do it in isolation. We do it in silos. We don't come together in that space to celebrate together or do things together. Only in the space of, if we need something, for example, if it's an immigration issue, for advocacy or for any of those sorts of issues, we would come together. And likewise, I would say vice versa, the other communities also look at us in the same space. Only when we have to collectively come together as ethnic communities and work with the mainstream, we join up. Otherwise, we are siloed and we do our own stuff. So that's one point of how we are working here in New Zealand as ethnic communities. The other aspect that I would say is we are in the space of trying to engage with other ethnic communities through festivals, through activities, and through also obviously art and culture. In the cultural space, we try and engage with them. There are a lot of multicultural councils across the country, several multicultural councils across the country where we are all part of that multicultural council. and we try and celebrate together. So at that point, we don't see our differences, because what we are trying to do is we are all having our space to present ourselves to the wider community. Again, it's going back to that first point of not just advocacy or issues, but also to celebrate and show our unity as ethnic communities. We come together. But when it comes to real issues of what are our independent challenges, like, Filipino community will have their own challenges, Chinese community will have their own challenges, Indonesians, South Africans, all of us have got our own challenges. I think we have failed in that space to come together. As I said, it could be work in progress. We could do a lot more in that space to change the perception that we are not competing with them, or we are not, a threat to them, but we are more, again, going back to that collaboration point, that we can do things together individually with each community or collectively with other communities in all of the spaces, in profession, in media, in art, in software, in all of the areas that we could do. So I think that's what my view is, that people are not seeing us, and there is different levels of perception about the Indian community, because we are so diverse. Everyone thinks that we can we are all Gujaratis, or we are all businessmen, or we are all, they stereotype us, including the other ethnic communities. They stereotype us as we are all IT professionals. So the minute they see
Great.
me as Indian,
Good.
they think, I mean, when they talk to me, they ask me, are you an IT? Are you in the IT industry?
Yes.
So it is a perception that they have already put us in a box, and we haven't done much to engage with them. I would take the blame on us rather than, putting it on somebody else, that we haven't proactively gone and engaged with other communities as best as we could have done. And there is work to be done, a huge amount of work to be done in that space. And likewise, I would say the others have also not engaged with us. So it is
Great.
mutual.
Prabha, absolutely wonderful. I totally agree with what you said. I'm sure, Venkat, you can briefly, if you want to add to what Prabha
Yeah,
already said,
I would like to say
then we move to
that,
the next.
yeah, certainly. I'd like to say there are a few aspects on which there is a lot of coordination going on now. I sit on 3 police district boards in Auckland. There are 3 district boards in Auckland. I sit on all of them, and I also sit on the police commissioner's advisory group. Now, about 7 years ago, 4 of us started an initiative called Gandhi Nivas. It is to address family violence. In New Zealand, we call it family violence. We don't call it domestic violence. So we started Gandhi Nivas primarily to bring people who are men who are perpetrators of family violence, convert them into good people, and send them back home rather than breaking families. So this was the concept with which we work with the police. When people get arrested, they're given a choice. You can go to a hotel and stay for 5 days, or you can go to Gandhi Nivas and stay there for 5 days. They come to us, it's completely free. We're funded by the government. They have to undergo counseling compulsorily, and then we send them back. The non-offending rate is 62% in Gandhi Nivas. Now, the most important aspect is that we started this for the Indian community. Today, our customers are more Maori and Pacific Islanders. Now, we've got to remember that the Maori population is around 850,000 in New Zealand, and the Pacificas, that is people from Samoa, Tonga, Cook Islands, Kiribati, they number almost 300,000. They are not grouped under ethnic communities, but they do come under ethnic communities. So today, we work with Pacific Islanders, Maori, and European to address one common enemy, that is family violence. Violence against women. New Zealand is perhaps the first or only country, I'm not sure. They have a separate ministry to address sexual violence against women. This was formed last year when Jacinda was returned for the second term. So we are finding grounds for working together, not just with Maori or Pacifica, but also with the Europeans. We find in Gandhi Nivas, we are now beginning to get African communities coming to us for counseling. So it's a long process, but it has begun. So we are not working in isolation. Perhaps culturally, yes. Last thing, Anupji, apart from people asking whether you're from IT, another thing they ask is that, do you speak Indian language? So they don't understand. They don't know that there is no such thing as Indian language. There's no such thing as Indian food. There's no such thing as Indian culture even.
Yeah, true.
There's
true.
diversity throughout.
Thank you so much, Venkat. This is absolutely, I think you are spot on. And that's the beauty of India. You know, when you yourself are so diverse, nobody sees challenge or fear in you because you're yourself. So diverse, you are able, that shows your capacity to accommodate. We are just almost there, just left with 5 minutes. And I want to utilize these 5 minutes to ask you both. You see, when I looked at the data, I may be wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong. There are about 30,000 Indian students who are in New Zealand for higher education. And the way the your preference for education abroad amongst the Indian students is growing, this number might increase, which means we are investing the young in this relationship, right? Now, please, both of you, take just about a minute and a half, not very long. How do you see this relationship, say, 25 years from now? Those young students who are going to New Zealand today, where would they be in terms of this relationship? Do you think this relationship can further build, or you see the challenges? That means you please tell us what are the do's and don'ts for this ecosystem, right? How to build on this and not let this whole thing slip up. Because the mistakes of my generation will cost my future generation. So please tell us, what do you think? Where do you see the diaspora in New Zealand in next 25 years? And what are the do's and don'ts in your mind?
So who goes first?
Yeah, this is your turn now.
Okay. I think first and foremost is that in the next 25 years, we see the education sector getting more and more regulated. We will see the fly-by-night organizations vanishing. We will see organizations which put up boards almost on every other building, offering short-term courses, offering courses that say that it's a pathway to residency, pathway to citizenship. All that will vanish because increasingly the New Zealand government is getting wary of providing permanent residence status to students, international students. In fact, the current program, which is to regularize resident status to all the people who are here, around 115,000 of them, they will all get permanent resident status, but that does not include international students. So that gives an indication as to what the government's thinking is. So, sir, in the next 25 years, New Zealand will look for high quality people who want to come and complete their education and perhaps get jobs here. Through the jobs, they get work permits. Through work permits, they can get resident permit. That is the route to follow. Organizations which offer cheap courses, luring students from India, education agents who cheat people in India, all that will be a thing of the past. I think India is really becoming in itself a very high quality education oriented country. I'm told that some new universities are coming up in India. So perhaps the kind of demand for overseas education may not exist in as much of a volume as it is now. But New Zealand will continue to welcome international students from India because it is known that students from India really do concentrate on their studies, and they are the ones who get back into the economy as business people, etc. By the way, before I conclude, I want to tell you that top first 5 Indian business people in New Zealand are not from India.
Okay.
They're from Singapore,
Yeah, secondary
Hong
migration.
Kong. Yeah, they're not from India at all.
Right, right.
But they
Got it.
categorize themselves as Indians.
Yes, yes, yes. Prabha?
Okay, I specialize in this area. I worked in the international education space, so I've got a few things that I would like to share in this space. International students, I would say probably 15 years ago, we had really high quality international students from India who were very focused on learning, on enrolling for postgraduate programs, like how our students were going to USA or UK for post-graduation. But there was a sudden drive by New Zealand government because they wanted to increase not just the population but also the revenue for the country.
Revenue.
So there was a drive to go and get as many as possible, and moving from 2.4 billion to 5 billion. That was the government's mandate to us, the crown entity, to be able to go and double the international student revenue. So there were a lot of, I would say, very low quality organizations, institutions that went left, right, and center and recruited a whole bunch of students, irrespective of they had language skills or they had any sort of background, they were successful in their own country. Those were taken into consideration. They were just recruited in masses and they came and joined here. So I would say one of the biggest increase in population was from this cohort of international students who came to New Zealand in the last 10 to 12 years, which is a sad state because unfortunately, we like it or not, they have become the Indian community, if I say that. People see them as Indian community and they have started to perceive us in a much lower scale compared to many other international students who are coming from other countries, which is a very sad state of affair. But as Venkatji mentioned, the market is correcting itself now, and the immigration New Zealand have recognized that this is not sustainable for New Zealand because we are such a small country and we have got a lot of domestic issues like housing and all of those things that need to cater. When you have growth in population, there is a lot of infrastructure that goes with it to provide that specific infrastructure, and New Zealand is not geared up to provide that kind of infrastructure to the new migrants if they come in volumes like that. So there was a sudden shift in the way that, especially for India, specifically for India, I would say, they had started to focus on only bringing research students or students for post-graduation, and only students who can enroll in universities or institutes of technologies. All the private training providers started to suffer because of this sudden change. But I think that's a good thing. That was a good step taken forward. But I would say that it is not just Indian agents or Indian students who came. The country opened out and they said, we are welcoming people because we want to increase the revenue. And also, people were clipping the ticket and making use of that opportunity. Our agents, everyone who made best use of that opportunity to migrate to a very peaceful country and a high standard of living country. So that was the story behind the New Zealand international student migration, I would say. But moving forward in 25 years, I'm seeing that the Indians will, who are coming here now for research and higher education, would be the stars in 25 years. They would be in very prominent positions in a very respectable profession, that people will start looking at us in a different space. I really hope that will happen, but the move is there, the drive is there to attract the best quality, high quality international students, especially Indian students, to New Zealand. So I'm thinking in 25 years, we are going to be in a much better state in all aspects of the New Zealand community, profession, and lifestyle. And we will be well regarded and respected if we go down this path and maintain our quality. If we don't, and we still start to get more lower grade students, then it is going to be an issue. Our image is not going to be the best that India wants to maintain overseas.
Thank you, Prabha. Wonderful. I think we are almost there to close it. Gopalji, last 1 minute.
Thank you, Ambassador Mutkal. I think the first episode of this dialogue with the diaspora has given us some good insight. The type of discussion that we had, we could focus on a few issues, but we could get very good insight into those aspects. Of course, there are many other issues like, I would have liked to ask about, our Indian youth in the sports in New Zealand. I see, most of them are into cricket, but not into other sports. Then also into the entertainment segment, in the social media segment. So maybe, Ambassador, we can have, more of such dialogues in future. And I think it's better rather than having, very curtailed dialogues which do not lead us, and do not give us, any significant, insight into the subject. I think this model has been quite useful, and we would like to have comments from, our panelists also, if you think that this is a better way of doing it, or we should simply have like 30 seconds answers, like you usually have on on the prime time TV kind of thing.
All right, then 30 seconds each, Prabha and Venkatji, just for 30 seconds. Do you think this format has value?
Absolutely. I think I would say this is a better way of engaging and answering questions, and having that informal dialogue would be very useful for people who are considering to come to New Zealand as well, or for us New Zealanders to engage with India, to understand India. I would also like to have a other way of engaging where Indians can share some of the successes and other things that New Zealand Indians can also learn, because there are so many things that we know about, but there are million things that we don't know about what India is doing. So it would be wonderful for us to have that dialogue as well, not just one-sided, but both-sided. That would be my take on it.
Yeah, right. Venkatji, you want to take 30 seconds? Venkatji, are you there?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Do you want to take 30 seconds to tell us whether this format has value?
Absolutely. This is an extremely valuable tool. I think this kind of panel discussions are very useful. It gives us an opportunity to exchange ideas. My only point would be that we also should have an opportunity to pass on some comments that we may have from a diaspora perspective, so that you can take it up further and see whether they are worthy of being carried to the powers that be, because we can't depend on anybody else except yourselves to carry some of the concerns that the diaspora would have for you to evaluate and see whether they're worthy of addressing.
Exactly, Venkatji. In fact, that is the core objective of this dialogue, because we want to pick your minds on those issues, convert those into an easy understandable language, and then carry it to the authorities that be, and tell them that is how the diaspora feels. is there anything that we could do for making sure that the gaps are plugged and the mistakes are avoided?
Yeah.
So I think in conclusion, I would say I'm so glad and thankful to all of you. This was a very deliberate attempt to keep the discussion informal, small group, focused on certain issues, on the assumption and promise that this is only the beginning. As Gopalji mentioned, when you walk on a large, long journey, you take initial steps. And when you reach the end of the journey, then you understand how many steps you have taken. So this is the first step. And I'm very happy that I looked at this as a dialogue of the adults, right? This will really give us many ideas. And we would make this dialogue available, as I said, to a much wider diasporic communities. If they have ideas from this conversation, I'm sure they would also share. So it will become a network of sharing ideas. Now, let thousands of ideas emerge, and then we will see which are the ideas which are doable and workable. So we will take many steps at a time, right? It will be an evolutionary process, not a revolutionary process. But if you go by my experience, the evolution has always worked, right?
Yeah,
so with these
absolutely.
words, I really thank you so much. We kept the time more or less. We just exceeded by 5 minutes. And I think that is absolutely excusable. Thank you very much. If you have some more ideas, please send us your email with those ideas, very precise suggestions if you have. We will compile them, convert them into a report for the authorities in India. And I'll continue on counting on your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
sir.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very
Thank you
much.
very much.
You have
Thanks.
a pleasant day. We've almost come to the end of Sunday. Sorry, Saturday. For you, you're still in the mid of the day. The whole country is rejoicing there at the release of Aryan Khan.
And
Yeah.
happy Deepavali and happy Deepavali.